My name is Savannah Brooks. I'm 28, and at the time all of this happened, I worked emergency veterinary care at a regional animal hospital just outside town. That night I had spent hours helping stabilize a burned Labrador that came in after a kitchen fire. My scrubs still smelled like antiseptic, smoke, and wet fur. I was exhausted enough that the porch light looked too bright when I pulled in, and for one stupid second I thought maybe a trash bag had blown over in the wind. Then I saw my winter coat in the flower bed, one shoe halfway down the driveway, and my framed certification papers sliding toward the curb because my sister had nudged the tote they were in with her sneaker. My mother was on the porch with her arms folded so tightly across her chest it looked like she was trying to hold herself together by force. She didn't say my name. She didn't ask how work was. She stood there behind my father like a witness who had already chosen not to intervene. Tessa, my younger sister, gave me that little smirk she always wore when she thought someone else was about to absorb the fallout for her. Richard raised his voice before I even shut off the engine. "You're 28, he shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. From their porches. You drain this family dry and then stroll in here whenever you feel like it. Get your junk and get out." It was the phrasing that almost made me laugh. My junk. As if the things in the yard weren't the last scraps of a life I'd been building while quietly helping keep theirs from collapsing. As if I was some freeloading stranger who had been crashing on their couch for fun. The people across the street were pretending not to stare, but no one misses that kind of cruelty when it's happening under a porch light. I looked at my father's phone pointed at me and realized what he wanted more than anything was a performance he could later call proof. Proof that I was unstable. Proof that I was dramatic. Proof that he had finally been forced to do what a strong father had to do. I didn't give him any of that. I got out of the car, stepped over a broken lamp, and started loading my things in silence. One tote in the trunk. One trash bag in the back seat. My framed certificate had a cracked corner. My childhood photos were damp from the sprinkler line. Tessa actually laughed when she saw me kneel to pick up a picture of me at 8 years old in a paper crown from some elementary school play. My father kept talking the whole time, mostly for the audience. About respect. About adulthood. About how he was done supporting a daughter who gave nothing back. That's what made something inside me go cold. Because I had spent years giving back. I just wasn't giving it in ways that looked dramatic or masculine enough for him to value. When I had everything I could carry shoved into the car, I closed the trunk, walked back to the porch, and looked at all three of them. My father was still holding the phone up. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Tessa had that mean little boredom on her face that cruel people mistake for confidence. I said, very quietly, "I hope all of you sleep well tonight. Because one day soon, none of you are going to sleep at all." Then I got in the car and drove away before my hands started shaking. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't pull into a church parking lot. And sob. I drove 3 exits south, parked behind a 24-hour gas station, and sat there listening to the sound of my own breathing. When I reached to toss my bag onto the passenger seat, I noticed my phone screen was still lit. Somewhere in the chaos of gathering my things, I'd accidentally hit the voice memo app. It had been recording. I sat perfectly still and pressed play. There was the scrape of a tote hitting concrete. My father barking that I was useless. Tessa laughing. My mother's voice, low and exhausted, saying, "Just let her go, Richard. She brought this on herself." I listened to it once, then again, then a third time, because I knew exactly how families like mine work. By morning, it would become a misunderstanding. By next week, a story about my temper. By Christmas, they'd tell people I had stormed out over nothing. But the recording didn't soften. It didn't forget. It didn't negotiate with their version of events. So I saved the file, made a folder on my phone called Receipts, and dropped it in there before driving to the cheapest extended stay motel I could find near the interstate. That first night I ate 2 stale granola bars from a vending machine and sat on the edge of a bedspread that smelled faintly like bleach and old cigarettes. At around 1:30 in the morning, my phone lit up with 6 missed calls. Then 11 messages. Then 20. My father demanded to know where I was. My mother said I was acting unstable and embarrassing everyone. Tessa sent, LOL, have fun paying for your own everything. I didn't answer any of them. I took screenshots and added those to the folder too. Documentation is not pettiness when you've spent your whole life around people who edit reality for sport. Documentation is how you keep your own memory from being stolen. The next morning, I called the one person I trusted to tell me the truth even if it stung. Noah Carter was a paramedic I'd met a couple of years earlier when he wheeled a seizing beagle into our ER at 3 in the morning and stayed calm while everyone else in the room was moving too fast. He had this maddening habit of asking the exact question you didn't want to answer and then sitting there until you did. When he picked up, he didn't say, "Oh my God, are you okay?" He said, "Tell me exactly what happened, and don't clean it up for them." So I told him everything. The lawn. The camera. My mother's silence. Tessa kicking my things. The voice memo. The motel. I didn't minimize any of it, and I didn't excuse anybody. When I finished, he was quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked, "If they called you crying tonight and asked you to come back, would you go?" The answer came out of me so fast it startled me. No. Good, he said. Then stop treating this like a family argument you can still fix. It's a fire you finally walked out of. That sentence stayed with me because it was true in a way I hadn't been brave enough to say out loud. I had not been evicted from a basically loving home because everyone was stressed. I had been expelled from a system built around guilt, utility, and performance. My father liked to act like the house ran because he worked hard and laid down the law. The truth was messier. The house ran because my mother retreated, my sister took what she could, and I quietly filled every gap that kept the machine from exposing itself. By lunchtime, I had started making a list. Affordable rooms for rent. Extra shifts I could pick up. Storage units nearby. Application deadlines for the surgical technician certification program I'd been putting off because there was always some family emergency, some bill issue, some ride somebody needed, some weekend obligation I was expected to handle. My father loved to say serious careers were for people who finished what they started. Meanwhile, I was finishing overnight recoveries, calming panicked pet owners, handling medication schedules, and keeping half of his household logistics in my head without ever being credited for it. By the third day, I had worked 2 extra overnight shifts and found a weekly motel rate I could barely afford. After gas, the food, and the storage deposit, I had $341 left. It should have terrified me more than it did. Instead, I felt clear. No one was timing my showers, picking fights over groceries, or guilting me for being too tired to solve someone else's mess after a 12-hour shift. At work, chaos made sense in a way home never did. A Shepherd mix came in after being hit by a car at 2 in the morning, and my hands knew exactly what to do. We got the dog stabilized. We set up fluids. We moved with purpose. My supervisor, Dr. Elaine Mercer, watched me through most of the intake without saying much. At the end of the shift, when I was finishing my notes, she leaned against the counter and said, "Savannah, why haven't you applied for the advanced surgical track yet?" I almost said what I usually said, which was some bland lie about timing or money or not being ready. But maybe exhaustion had finally burned the politeness out of me, because instead I said, "Because every time I get close, something at home blows up and I end up putting myself on hold." She studied me for a second, not prying, just seeing more than I wanted seen. Then she said, "Then maybe now is the right time to stop doing that." That same afternoon, Noah met me at a diner near the freeway, slid into the booth across from me, and pushed a yellow legal pad to the center of the table. He'd written 3 words at the top: housing, certification, boundaries. These are your priorities, he said. Not defending yourself. Not fixing their feelings. Not teaching them what they did wrong. You have no spare energy for any of that. He made me play out the scenarios anyway. If my mother called crying. If my father threatened to cut me off, even though there was nothing left to cut. If Tessa suddenly acted like we were sisters again because the house felt tense. Every answer I gave at first still had too much softness in it. Maybe I would hear them out. Maybe I would stop by just once. Maybe I could explain. Noah shook his head every time. You still think if you find the right words, they'll react like healthy people, he said. You're talking to the version of them you wanted, not the version that threw your belongings outside. It wasn't gentle, but it was useful. We made a plan. I applied for the certification pathway that night. I answered an ad for a room above a detached garage owned by a widow named Mrs. Delaney. I moved my important paperwork into a small storage unit. Then I did something tiny that felt enormous. I changed my emergency contact at the hospital from my mother to Noah. It was one tap on a screen. That's all. But when I hit save, it felt like cutting a hidden wire that had been wrapped around my ribs for years. Meanwhile, the messages from home started changing shape. The insults didn't stop exactly, but they lost their heat. My father wanted to know where the car title paperwork was. My mother needed the login for the utility portal. Tessa asked if I had remembered to reorder the dog's medication refill. There was no apology in any of it. No worry about whether I had a safe place to sleep. Just inconvenience. That was the moment the truth landed cleanly. I had not created grief by leaving. I had created labor. I was the one who set the grocery pickup when my mother forgot. I was the one who knew which pharmacy had my father's refill in stock when the usual place was backordered. I paid half the groceries more often than anyone admitted. I signed for deliveries. I kept track of bill deadlines. I handled the dog's medicine, the vet appointments, the insurance reminders, the passwords that no one else bothered to remember because someone always did it for them. Me. The daughter my father had just called a parasite had apparently also been serving as unpaid infrastructure. Once I saw that, the whole family story collapsed. By the end of the week, I moved into Mrs. Delaney's garage apartment with 2 duffel bags, a mattress from Facebook Marketplace, a folding chair, and a used lamp that leaned slightly to the left. The place smelled like sawdust, old paint, and radiator heat. It had a tiny kitchenette, a narrow shower, and one window that looked out over her tomato plants. It was perfect. My first night there, I sat cross-legged on the floor eating lo mein straight from the carton, surrounded by unopened boxes, and listened to the silence. Not loaded silence. Not the thin, dangerous quiet before an argument. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that lets your nervous system figure out it doesn't have to brace every second. My father texted before midnight, "This childish stunt has gone far enough." Tessa texted 10 minutes later, "Mom got a late fee because you didn't remind her about the car insurance." I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny. Because it was such a clean demonstration of who they really were. The people who had thrown my belongings into the yard were now furious that I wasn't still helping them run their lives from exile. If you've ever had family members who only notice your value once you stop carrying them, you know how strange that moment is. It doesn't feel triumphant right away. It feels clarifying. Like someone finally turned the lights on in a room where you've been tripping over the same furniture for years. I stopped fantasizing about yelling back. I stopped rehearsing speeches in the shower. Revenge was becoming something quieter and far more satisfying. It looked like absence. It looked like not rescuing them from the problems they had always hidden inside my labor. Days 6 through 10 were when the real unraveling started. Mrs. Delaney knew half the subdivision where I grew up, and facts kept finding their way to her. On day 6 she appeared with a casserole and said, "Honey, your daddy was hollering in that driveway loud enough for 3 houses." Then she added, "Men only get that loud when the audience they wanted didn't clap." After that the updates came fast. Tessa texted that mom cried at Costco. Noah told me my father was arguing with a cable guy because nobody knew the account password. My mother left a voicemail that started in tears and ended in accusation. Same pattern, different day. Not grief. Labor. On day 9, an old coworker texted me. Her aunt lived 2 doors down from my parents. She said people in the neighborhood were talking because my father had shown the lawn video to someone at work like it proved a point, and instead of backing him up, people thought it made him look cruel. I read that message 3 times. It told me more than she probably intended. My father had not just wanted me gone. He had wanted public validation. He had wanted people to admire him for humiliating me. He wanted witnesses to agree that I deserved it. But public cruelty is risky. Sometimes the public chooses not to join in. That night my phone started exploding. By 2:30 in the morning, I had 88 messages. My father barked orders. My mother demanded I call. Tessa sent frantic updates about his mood, the neighbors, bills, whispers, tension. Everything. One message sat in the middle of the flood like a dropped stitch in a pattern. He can't sleep. I stared at that one for a long time. Not because I felt sorry for him. Because it took me back to the porch light reflecting off his face when he told me to get out. He had looked so sure of himself. So clean in his certainty. Men like my father always assume consequences belong to other people. They think they can explode at night and wake up to a reset button in the morning. But shame is patient. When it finally circles back, it doesn't tap politely on the door. It bangs until the whole house hears it. The next afternoon, while I was helping prep a golden retriever for emergency abdominal surgery, Dr. Mercer pulled me aside. My application to the surgical track had been accepted. More than that, the hospital was willing to sponsor most of the cost if I committed to the full year-long program. I should have started crying right there in the prep room. Instead, I felt something steadier and deeper. Vindication, maybe. Not the loud kind. The private kind. The same week my father was losing sleep because I was no longer maintaining his household, I was being invited into the career future he had always implied I wasn't disciplined enough to deserve. That night, I listened to the voicemails. My father no longer sounded righteous, just frayed. My mother sounded scared in the selfish way people do when neutrality stops protecting them. Tessa sounded younger than she ever had with me, frightened now that the chaos had nowhere to land except inside the house. Fix it. That word lodged under my skin. Because that's what I had been to them, wasn't it? Not daughter. Not sister. Not even scapegoat, exactly. More like insulation. The buffer that absorbed impact so the structure could appear intact from the outside. The one who remembered, managed, soothed, covered, carried. Once I was gone, the family's dysfunction was no longer padded. It hit them directly, and suddenly they called that crisis. The first time I answered my father after leaving, I did it on day 10 in the hospital break room while eating crackers from a vending machine. Not because I had softened. Because I wanted the truth in his own voice, and I wanted a record of it. Before I picked up, I started recording on my phone. What? I said. He didn't say hello. Where the hell are you? At work. Don't get smart with me. Same tone. Same entitlement. Same assumption that throwing me out had somehow been a disciplinary tactic rather than a rupture. He launched into a rant about missed bills, my mother's stress, Tessa crying, people talking, neighbors prying, and how selfish I was for disappearing while the family was already under pressure. I let him talk himself out. Then he said the line I think he believed would finally break me. If you don't come home and help settle this, I'll make sure everybody knows what kind of daughter you are. I leaned back in the plastic break room chair and smiled at the cinderblock wall. There it was. Not concern. Not remorse. Reputation management dressed up as fatherhood. You mean you'll tell people you threw your daughter's belongings on the lawn while filming it? I asked. Silence. Go ahead, Dad. Another silence, shorter and meaner. You think you're tough now because you've got people filling your head? No, I said. I think I'm tough now because I can finally hear my own thoughts. He started to raise his voice, but I cut him off. And just so we're clear, I've recorded this call too. The dead air after that was so complete it almost felt sacred. Then he hung up. I laughed. Not because any of it was funny. Because I'd finally seen the whole mechanism clearly enough that it no longer frightened me the same way. I uploaded the audio beside the lawn recording and went back to work. An hour later, Dr. Mercer officially offered me the sponsored spot in the surgical track and a raise that came with the additional responsibilities. She shook my hand and said, "You belong here, Savannah." It was such a simple sentence, but I carried it around like warmth. At home, belonging had always been conditional. At work, it was earned. When I got back to the apartment that evening, Mrs. Delaney was watering her tomatoes in a faded blue robe and house slippers. She looked over the hedge and said, "Your old man came by." My stomach dropped. "I didn't let him in," she added. "Told him if he wanted to shout, he could do it from public property where everybody could hear." I could have hugged her. She handed me a paper towel with a phone number scribbled on it. "Like you'd somehow misplaced it," she said. Then she gave me the update that mattered more. People were talking. Not in the way my father hoped. Apparently one of the neighbors who saw the lawn scene had mentioned it to someone at the warehouse where he worked, and from there it spread in that quiet, ordinary way damaging information always does in a small town. He hadn't lost his job. Nothing cartoonish happened. But people were looking at him differently. Men like Richard Brooks don't need public ruin to feel consequence. Sometimes all it takes is a room that no longer automatically believes them. Around midnight, Tessa texted, "What did you say to him?" "He's stomping around like a psycho." I wrote back, "It went too far the night he put my life on the lawn." She read it immediately. No answer. What struck me wasn't that they were suffering. It was that their suffering had finally made room for the possibility that I was a person. Not a function. Not a backup battery. Not the daughter who could always be drafted back into service if everyone else had a hard week. Just a person, with a life, a job, a threshold, and a door they no longer controlled. 2 days later, my father showed up in person outside the garage apartment just after sunset. I saw his truck first. Then the knock. Hard, irritated, familiar enough to make my shoulders tense before I even stood up. My body knew him before my mind caught up, the dread, the alertness, the old instinct to assess mood from the rhythm of a knock. But I didn't freeze. I went to the door, left the chain on, and opened it just wide enough to see him. Richard Brooks looked worse than I had ever seen him. Not humbled. Not broken. Just worn rough around the edges. Bloodshot eyes. Jaw clenched. Same work jacket he'd probably worn for 2 days. He glanced past me into the apartment, taking in the second-hand shelf, the folding table, the lamp that leaned, the boxes I still hadn't unpacked. I saw the judgment rise in him on instinct. Then I saw him realize judgment didn't land here the way it used to. "We need to talk," he said. "We're talking. Your mother's a wreck. Your sister cries every day. This has gone on long enough. You threw me out. I was angry. You filmed it." His face twitched. "I didn't think." Exactly. That landed harder than any speech could have. He shifted, trying out a softer tone that sounded awkward in his mouth. "Savannah, I only wanted you to stand on your own feet." The audacity of that nearly made me admire him. Light the house on fire, then call the flames motivation. "I am on my own feet," I said. "That's what's bothering you." He blinked. Really blinked, like the idea had not occurred to him. In that moment I understood something important. Control had always depended on my continued hunger for his approval. The second I stopped reaching for it, he lost his strongest tool. Then he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You're making me look like a monster. Not you hurt me. Not I was wrong. Not I'm sorry. You're making me look like a monster." I laughed right in his face. "I'm not making you look like anything. You did that yourself." His skin flushed dark red. "After all we've done for you." "You mean after all I did for you?" I said. "Who kept track of Mom's prescriptions? Who handled the grocery orders? Who paid for food when you were short? Who stayed home for deliveries and paperwork and vet pickups? Who remembered every password nobody else could be bothered to write down?" He didn't answer because he couldn't. The silence between us was packed full of invisible tasks. All the labor that had disappeared into the word daughter as if it cost nothing and deserved nothing back. Then he said something low and ugly. "Families don't survive daughters like you." Maybe he meant daughters who stop obeying. Daughters who become witnesses. Daughters who say the quiet part out loud. I don't know. But I opened the door 1 inch wider, looked him directly in the eye, and said, "Then maybe the family you built shouldn't survive." He actually flinched. Behind him, Mrs. Delaney's porch light clicked on. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Someone was watching. Good. Let them. My father tried one last move and reached toward the gap in the door like he could still close distance by force of habit. I stepped back. "Leave," I said. "Now, Savannah. Leave before I play the recording of you threatening me for the whole block." That did it. He stared at me for a second like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Then he turned, got in his truck, and peeled away too fast. When he disappeared around the corner, my knees loosened in that delayed way adrenaline works. I locked the door, leaned against it, and breathed until my pulse settled. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Delaney texted, "Proud of you. Also your father almost took out a trash can." 20 minutes after that, Noah called and stayed on speaker while I washed dishes so I wouldn't sit alone replaying everything in the dark. Then an old neighbor sent me a message that said people had heard enough of the exchange to put things together. Again, nothing dramatic happened. No lightning strike. No cinematic punishment. Just the steady social cost of being known as the man who threw his daughter out, tracked her down, and still expected obedience from the curb. That kind of exposure cuts deeper than screaming, especially for men who build their whole identity around being respected without question. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing. There was grief in it. There is always grief when you close the door on a parent, even a parent who forced your hand. But relief was there too, sharp and almost frightening. If you've spent years surviving inside someone else's emotional weather, the first time you realize you can shut the window is almost disorienting. You half expect lightning anyway. A week later came the event that tied the whole thing together. Every spring our hospital sponsored an animal rescue fundraiser in a park not far from my old neighborhood. Because I had just joined the surgical track, Dr. Mercer asked if I wanted to represent the clinic at the intake tent. For a second I considered declining when I realized where it was. Then I found out the neighborhood association was holding a community picnic in the same park on the same day. Of course my parents were going. Richard Brooks loved any setting with witnesses. For years I had rearranged myself to avoid scenes. This time I decided not to move at all. So I went. I wore clean navy scrubs with the hospital logo, clipped on my new badge, tied my hair back, and spent the first hour checking in foster dogs and calming nervous adopters. I was good at what I did. Calm. Competent. Needed in a way that had nothing to do with keeping my family from imploding. Around noon I saw them across the field. My mother at a folding table. Tessa scanning the crowd with tired eyes. My father laughing too loudly with two neighbors. Then one of the women from across the street recognized me and walked over. "Savannah, I had no idea you worked in emergency animal care," she said. "That's wonderful." Another neighbor asked if it was true I was in a specialty training program. Before I could answer, Dr. Mercer smiled and said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "She's one of the best techs we have." My father heard. I know he did because when I looked up, the smile had dropped off his face. That was the moment the whole power dynamic shifted in public. He had introduced me one way under a porch light, as a burden, an ungrateful daughter, a problem. Now, in almost the same neighborhood, other people were introducing me another way, as capable, disciplined, respected, and visibly moving forward without him. His version of me could not survive contact with witnesses who were seeing something else firsthand. Tessa approached first. She looked rougher than usual, less smug, more fragile, mascara heavier than necessary, like she had been sleeping badly and trying to hide it. "Can we talk?" she asked. "You can talk." She glanced back toward our parents and lowered her voice. "Everything's been insane. He yells all the time now. Mom keeps crying. People keep asking questions." I let the silence do some work. Then she said, in a rush, "I didn't think it would go this far." There it was. Not accountability exactly, but its first nervous cousin. "You kicked my bag into the street," I said. She swallowed. "I know. You laughed." Her eyes filled immediately. "I know." I believed she regretted it. Regret, however, is not repair. "You don't get to borrow me as a sister only when the house gets ugly," I said. The ugliness was there before I left. "You just weren't standing where I was standing." She cried then, right there beside the rescue tent while families carried dogs past us and children tugged at balloons. Not movie crying. The messy, humiliating kind that no one can stylize into innocence. A few minutes later, my mother came over with her face tight and brittle. "Please," she whispered, glancing around. "Not here." I almost smiled. Not here was exactly the luxury they denied me when they threw my life into public view. "You made it here," I said. "All of it." Her gaze moved over my badge, my clipboard, my coworkers, the people greeting me by name. Something shifted in her face. Maybe shame. Maybe just the recognition that I had become legible to other people in a way she could not control. Then my father walked toward us. No shouting this time. The crowd wasn't the right kind. The audience might not choose him. He stopped a few feet away and said, "You look busy." It was such a small sentence, but it carried defeat inside it. "I am." He looked at the tents, the doctors, the adopters, the volunteers, the neighbors who knew exactly who I was now and were watching him with far less generosity than they once might have. For once, he seemed unsure which role he was supposed to play. Stern father. Wronged parent. Public victim. None of them fit. The daughter he had tried to shrink into a burden was standing in front of him in full view of the same community, and I was harder to reduce outside his house than inside it. Finally he said, "People have been talking." "Yes," I said. "They do that when they watch a man throw his daughter's things on a lawn." My mother closed her eyes. Tessa stared at the grass. My father looked like he wanted to argue, revise, or minimize, but that kind of rewrite only works when the room still belongs to you. This one didn't. "I didn't think," he started again. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." We stood there a moment in the bright afternoon with barking dogs in the background and paper streamers fluttering from the association tables. Then I gave them the only thing I was willing to give. Truth without comfort. I'm not coming back. I'm not fixing your house. What happened after I left is not something I did to you. It's what was already there when I stopped carrying it. No one argued. Not even Richard. Because he knew. Tessa wiped her face and whispered, "I'm sorry." This time I believed she meant it. My mother opened her mouth as if she wanted to ask for something softer, maybe a visit, maybe a call, maybe some temporary little bridge she could point to later and call hope. I spared her that fantasy. "Maybe one day we can talk," I said. "But not because you need me to make things easier. It will only happen if you learn how not to treat me like I'm disposable." Then Dr. Mercer called my name from the intake table, and I turned back to work. That was the ending they got. Not forgiveness. Not reunion. Just the truth, spoken in public, while I chose my own life. Later, when the event was winding down, I opened the old recording from the night on the lawn, listened for 5 seconds, and deleted it. Not because they deserved mercy. Because I didn't need proof anymore. I used to think family meant forever, no matter the cost. Now I think love that only survives when you stay useful, obedient, or small isn't love at all. It's dependency wearing a sentimental mask. If someone only values the version of you that makes their life easier, then walking away may be the first honest thing you ever do. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether leaving people like that makes you cruel, here is what I learned. Cruelty is throwing your daughter's belongings into the yard for an audience. Cruelty is recording her humiliation and calling it discipline. Cruelty is using love as leverage and silence as a weapon. Refusing to go back to that is not cruelty. Sometimes it's the first sane thing you've ever done. And the question I still come back to is this: if the people calling your suffering family only know how to love the version of you that hurts quietly, how much of your life are you willing to lose before you stop calling that love?